Why hadn't anyone noticed this earlier? She's quite good at it. Each scheme operates under a different identity, through a different network, and is distinct from the others. She employs people who aren't even aware that they work for her. Even if they ever figure it out, she has enough inside information on influential people to guarantee their silence. Patricia produced an additional file that had a federal prosecutor, 2 state senators, and 3 judges. I discovered proof of coercion, bribery, and blackmail dating back 15 years. I gazed at the evidence that was strewn all over my table. It was no longer only about my attempted murder. This was a huge criminal conspiracy that had been going on for decades without anyone noticing. Eleanor's ability to manipulate the system and those in charge allowed her to get away with destroying lives, stealing riches, and potentially committing several murders. I suggested that we take this to the FBI. The local office, no. This is too large. Someone who can look into this without Eleanor's ties getting in the way is what we need. Patricia gave a nod. I've already made contact with someone at the FBI's Washington White-Collar Crime Division. She is untouchable, spotless, and known for taking down strong criminals. Although she needs more than we have, she is still fascinated. A witness from inside Eleanor's business is required. Someone who can vouch for these records and describe the methods used in the schemes. Who? Bradley, Patricia said plainly. For years, he has been supporting his mother. He is aware of the real and symbolic locations of all the bodies. We can remove Eleanor if we can turn the tables and get him to testify against her in return for a lighter sentence. Something in my chest twisted. Bradley had attempted my murder. He deserved to spend the rest of his life rotting in prison. I wanted to scream at the idea of giving him any sort of deal. But only if it meant bringing justice to Catherine and all of her victims, destroying Eleanor, and revealing what she had done. Finally, I added, set up a meeting with his lawyer. We'll find out if Bradley cherishes his independence more than his mother. Patricia grinned icily. It's going to be enjoyable. 2 days later, the meeting took place at Gregory's office. Across from us, looking uneasy, was Bradley's attorney, Theodore, a jittery man who obviously thought his client was guilty. Gregory outlined our plan. Bradley would completely cooperate with the FBI's investigation into his father's death and sister's disappearance, give in-depth testimony regarding Eleanor's illegal activities, and assist in the development of cases against her co-conspirators. In return, we would suggest a 15-year sentence rather than a life term with the chance of parole for the attempted murder accusation. Theodore spent an hour in a conference room consulting with Bradley. I drank coffee and tried not to think about the knot in my gut while I waited in Gregory's office. Bradley shouldn't have gotten a deal of any type. I wanted him to be hurt. Patricia, however, was correct. We might never be able to prove all Eleanor had done if we didn't have someone inside her group. She was too skilled at hiding her identity. At last, Theodore came back. Bradley accepts your conditions. He will provide you any proof you require and testify against his mother, but he has one more requirement. In what state? Sharply, Gregory inquired. He wants to talk to Lindsay by himself. Only 5 minutes. My hands began to clench into fists. There's no way to negotiate it, Theodore stated. Patricia began to protest, but I raised a hand. If you want his cooperation, he needs to say something to you first. He insists it's important. All right, 5 minutes. But, Patricia, you're remaining in the room the whole time, and I'll let you shoot him if he attempts anything, she said with a grim smile. Thank you. Bradley was brought in handcuffed and in an orange jumpsuit. His normally flawless hair was unclean and unkempt, and he was awful, thinner than I had ever seen him, with black circles under his eyes. He did not agree with prison. Excellent. Patricia's hand rested lightly on her firearm as she stood near the door. Gregory sat next to me, prepared with his legal pad. Bradley sat down opposite us, his handcuffs clattering on the metal table. He simply stared at me for a long time, his face unreadable. You have 5 minutes, I stated icily. His voice broke. Say whatever you need to say. I'm sorry, he said. I know I can never take back what I did, but I need you to know that I'm very sorry for everything. I never wanted to hurt you, and I never wanted any of this. I felt anger rising in my chest when you shoved me off a yacht into shark-infested waters. Enjoy the swim with the sharks in my ear while you did it, you whispered. How could that not have involved a desire to harm me? He leaned forward and frantically screamed. It was my mother. She had been in charge of me all my life and had orchestrated the marriage, the robbery, and the murder. But I was wrong, so wrong. And I'm sorry. You're not sorry you tried to kill me, I said, my voice steady despite the anger coursing through me. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. Bradley flinched like I'd slapped him. I was just doing as I always do, obeying her orders, believing that this was the only way, that you'd never give us what we needed, and that this was justified somehow. I can't sleep because I keep seeing your face when I pushed you, and I've been thinking about what I did to you and how scared you must have been in that water ever since they arrested me. You should be destroyed because you tried to kill me for money, married me, pretended to love me for 5 years, and then planned to rob me and leave me dead. Whatever suffering you're going through right now is nothing in comparison to what you deserve. The betrayal in your eyes is destroying me. Good, I said bluntly. I knew I deserved all of this, but my mother doesn't get to walk away from this. She's been controlling me since I was a child, using me to commit crimes, threatening me when I tried to resist, and she killed my sister, Catherine, as well as my father, Lindsay. I was a little surprised when I saw that tears were streaming down his face. But I can't keep living with that guilt. I helped cover it up because I was too afraid to tell her no. I looked at his face, searching for signs of deceit. Why should I believe anything you're saying? You're facing life in prison. Of course, you'd blame your mother and play the victim. Because I have proof, he said urgently. Every crime, every plot, every murder, I've been recording it all for years. I've also kept files concealed in locations my mother isn't aware of, just in case she tries to blame me. Gregory leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. I wanted to use them to destroy her, but I was planning to use them to escape her someday, to start over somewhere she couldn't reach me. What sort of documents, financial records, audio recordings of her confessing to crimes? Bradley's voice was shaking now, but there was evidence of my father's murder. Letters my mother wrote to the doctor who had fabricated the death certificate about payment for his cooperation. Information about Catherine's disappearance, including a recording of my mother confessing that she had had Catherine killed, and the location of the body's burial. I can deliver you my mother's entire business and watch it burn. I can give you every single person she's blackmailed, every crime she's committed, and every skeleton in her closet, but I need something in exchange. Bradley looked at Patricia, then back at me. My mother has connections everywhere. You're already getting a deal, I said. 15 years instead of life. I didn't mean the sentence reduction. I meant protection. The room was silent, and I looked at Gregory, who was scrawling notes frantically, and said, if she finds out I'm testifying against her, she'll have me killed. I need witness protection. A new identity after I serve my time. Enough money to disappear somewhere she'll never find me. You know if you're lying, Patricia said quietly, her arms crossed, her face skeptical but thoughtful. If you lead us on a wild goose chase and waste our time with fake evidence, your deal disappears and you go back to facing life in prison for attempted murder. I'm not lying. Bradley steadily met her gaze. I wanted to feel something for him, like sympathy, hatred, or vindication. I've loathed my mother for years. She's made my entire life a nightmare. This is my chance to finally be rid of her, even if it means spending 15 years in a jail first. All I could feel, though, was emptiness. This man had been my husband. I had trusted him, spent my life with him, and thought we had a future together. Now, he was just another criminal dealing to get what he wanted, and I didn't have the heart to feel sorry for him. But if you're playing us, Bradley, I'll personally make sure you never see daylight again. Got it? He nodded quickly. Give us the evidence, all of it, I said at last. If it checks out, if you cooperate fully with the FBI investigation and testify against your mother, I'll make sure you get your witness protection. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you for not cutting him off. Don't thank me. Don't apologize again. Just follow through on your promise, and perhaps you'll be able to live with yourself someday." I got up to signal that the meeting was over. "Get him out of here." As guards escorted Bradley away, I turned to Gregory and Patricia. Patricia remarked, "I'll need to confirm the evidence he's promising, but if he really has recordings of Eleanor confessing to murder, this case just got a lot bigger. Tell me we can trust him. His story checks out so far. We are no longer only discussing your attempted murder. We are discussing dismantling an organized crime group and a serial killer." Gregory gave a nod of approval. "This will make the FBI leap. Over the years, Eleanor has developed strong adversaries. People who would want to see her fail are the ones she has stolen from or blackmailed. We can make a strong case using Bradley's testimony and supporting documentation." I gazed at the metropolitan skyline from Gregory's office window. Eleanor was presumably preparing her next move while going freely somewhere, sure that she could use her cunning to get out of trouble as she usually had. She didn't know what was going to happen. "Set it up," I said. "I'll supply the FBI with any resources they require. Eleanor should spend the rest of her life behind bars, in my opinion. I want her to pass away there by herself, forgotten, and with everyone aware of what a monster she was." Patricia grinned. "We can make arrangements for that." At a charity gala 2 weeks later, Eleanor was taken into custody by the FBI. In the presence of 500 of Miami's most powerful and wealthy individuals, they pulled her out in handcuffs. Numerous cameras recorded her shocked, angry, and humiliated expression, which appeared on the front page of every newspaper in the nation. After that, the investigation proceeded swiftly. Bradley delivered on his promise, offering copious amounts of proof and in-depth testimony regarding his mother's transgressions. Catherine's remains were discovered buried on an Everglades property owned by Eleanor, just as Bradley had predicted. She had been murdered and strangled, and her body dissolved in acid to destroy the evidence, according to forensic findings. According to the medical examiner, she had passed away around 10 years prior to her disappearance. Bradley's father was the subject of equally devastating evidence. Eleanor had used a toxin that mimicked the signs of heart illness to gradually poison him over the course of 6 months. Following his incarceration, the doctor who had signed the fictitious death certificate instantly flipped and testified about Eleanor's role. He had been forced to cooperate by blackmail. Eleanor threatened to expose him unless he assisted in covering up the murder since she had proof of his medical misconduct. The cases of money laundering, fraud, and embezzlement were all equally simple. Every scam, every victim, and every dollar taken were all documented in detail in Bradley's files. Many of Eleanor's co-conspirators promptly agreed to plea bargains in exchange for testifying against her when prosecutors began assembling cases against them. Like a house of cards, her meticulously planned criminal business fell apart. 6 months later, the trial was set to take place. Eleanor rejected all plea talks, maintained her innocence, and said Bradley was lying about everything in order to get his own sentence lowered. Her attorneys used every tactic in the book to have the charges dropped or the evidence hidden. Nothing was successful. I readied myself for the experience that was ahead. The most terrible event of my life was the subject of months of testimony, media attention, and public scrutiny. But since I wouldn't be battling alone this time, I was prepared. On a muggy Monday morning in September, the trial got underway. Protesters and media vehicles encircled the courthouse. Some were rooting for me, while others were oddly protecting Eleanor, believing she was being set up by a spiteful daughter-in-law. Ignoring the yelled questions and flashing cameras, Patricia and I moved through the mob. Witnesses, reporters, and relatives of Eleanor's other victims crowded the courtroom, hoping to witness justice being done. Eleanor sat at the defense table looking stunning in a fitted navy suit, her silver hair groomed to perfection, and her face calm and certain. As I walked in, she gave me a quick glance, and for a split second, I saw a look of utter anger pass her face before she repressed it into a kind of innocent innocence. She was surrounded by a group of high-priced lawyers who focused on defending affluent criminals. Despite being good, they were dealing with a tough case. The entire range of Eleanor's offenses was outlined in the prosecution's opening statement. Many charges of fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and racketeering, as well as 2 counts of first-degree murder for her husband and daughter. Victoria, the astute assistant district attorney, meticulously described how Eleanor had spent decades constructing a criminal empire while disguising herself as respectable. By the conclusion of the trial, she assured the jurors, they would know Eleanor for what she really was, a heartless murderer who ruined everyone who stood in her way. Harrison, Eleanor's principal lawyer, who had built his career on defending white-collar offenders, retorted with an alternative story. Eleanor was portrayed by him as a distraught mother who was being harassed by her vindictive daughter-in-law. He asserted that Bradley's testimony was manipulated and untrustworthy, that the evidence was at best circumstantial, and that I had planned this entire prosecution out of spite. He requested that the jurors see Eleanor for who she truly was. A kind mother, a community leader, and a philanthropist who devoted her life to serving others. As I saw this performance at the gallery, I became more and more enraged with each syllable. Harrison did well. He almost gave Eleanor a sympathetic tone. But the evidence was overwhelming, and I knew Victoria was better. Over 3 weeks, the prosecution's case developed. They contacted forensic specialists who had investigated Catherine's remains and verified her murder. The doctor who had fabricated Bradley's father's death certificate was called, and he gave a moving statement regarding Eleanor's threats and extortion. They named elderly persons whose retirement funds Eleanor had embezzled, business partners she had wrecked, and victims of her fraud schemes. Eleanor's portrayal as a cunning predator gained depth with each witness. On day 12, Bradley gave his testimony. Since I had last seen him, he had changed in appearance. He was older now, with creases on his face that had not been there before because of prison. Head lowered, he avoided making eye contact with anyone, particularly Eleanor, as he made his way to the witness stand. I could see terror in his eyes when he finally turned to face his mother. She still frightened him here, even today. Victoria patiently guided him through his testimony. Bradley talked of being controlled by Eleanor as a child and how she had prepared him to assist her in committing crimes. He described seeing his father deteriorating due to poisoning and not realizing it until it was too late. He related how Eleanor had threatened to blame him for the murder if he ever mentioned it the night she told him she had had Catherine slain. I watched a few jurors wipe their eyes as his voice broke many times. Then he testified about me, how Eleanor had especially selected me due to my wealth, and how she had given him instructions to pursue me, marry me, and win my trust. He acknowledged that she had been plotting my murder for more than a year, waiting for the right moment. He talked about the morning on the yacht and how Eleanor had given him advice on how to push me and say things without getting bruises that would be discovered during an autopsy. As he described tossing me overboard, seeing me struggle in the water, and hearing Eleanor laugh as they sailed away, he started crying. His voice was no more than a whisper when he added, "I knew it was wrong. I was too scared of my mother to refuse, even though I knew it was murder. I've always been terrified of her." Harrison was brutally cross-examined. He questioned Bradley's integrity, implied that he was lying to receive a lesser sentence, and brought up the plea agreement he had taken. Bradley, however, remained steadfast. Everything he asserted was supported by recordings, papers, and bank records. Harrison was unable to stop testifying. On the 15th day, I was called to the stand. It seemed unreal to walk by Eleanor. This woman had attempted to kill me, and here I was sitting 20 feet away from her, ready to assist in her lifelong incarceration. The questions Victoria asked were simple. I talked about my marriage to Bradley, the boat vacation, and the time he shoved me overboard. I described treading water, seeing them sail away, and knowing that I would die. "What were you thinking about at the time?" Victoria asked softly. I said, my voice firm despite the emotions roiling inside me, that I'd been such a fool. That I had put my confidence in someone who didn't love me and simply thought of me as a way to make money, and that if I lived, I would make sure they were held accountable for their actions. Harrison's cross-examination attempted to portray me as a spiteful ex-wife who exaggerated events, but my testimony was backed up by the GPS data from the yacht, the medical records from my rescue, and the recordings I had made of Bradley and Eleanor. I couldn't be broken by him. After 3 weeks, the prosecution took a break. Eleanor defended herself for 2 days. Character witnesses who spoke about Eleanor's community service and humanitarian endeavors were summoned by Harrison, but Victoria destroyed them all during cross-examination, exposing how Eleanor had laundered stolen funds through the same charity. Eleanor did not testify herself. Given the evidence against her, it would be too dangerous. On a Friday, closing arguments took place. Victoria's presentation was strong and concise, taking the jury through each piece of evidence, crime, and victim. Harrison was pleading with the jurors to disregard the evidence and concentrate on the fictitious reasonable doubt. The jury spent 6 hours deliberating. My heart began to race when the bailiff declared the jury had returned a verdict. While we were waiting for the jury to arrive, Patricia squeezed my hand. I tried to read their expressions by observing their features, but they were deliberately bland. The verdict form was steadily held by the forewoman, Helen, a middle-aged teacher. How do you locate the defendant on the charge of first-degree attempted murder? I feel guilty. Eleanor's expression turned pale. She shrugged off Harrison's touch on her shoulder. How would you characterize the defendant on the charge of first-degree murder in Catherine Wells' death? I feel guilty. Eleanor let out a sound from her throat. Something in the middle between a groan and a gasp. People who had known Catherine were crying and holding each other in the gallery. How can you find the defendant on the first-degree murder charge in Robert Wells' death? I feel guilty. The guilty verdicts kept coming in. Each and every instance of embezzlement, fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. I feel guilty. I feel guilty. Guilty. Each of the 23 counts is a nail in Eleanor's coffin. By the end, her flawless composure was finally breaking as she gripped the table so tightly that her knuckles were white. After thanking the jurors, the judge set a 2-week sentence date. Eleanor eventually lost control when the bailiff moved to retake her. Guards caught her before she could get to me, but her yell reverberated throughout the courtroom as she lunged toward me and said, "This is all your fault. You destroyed my family. You should have died in that ocean like you were supposed to." I made a brief statement to the media outside the courthouse. Justice has been served today. Eleanor Wells is a murderer and a thief who destroyed countless lives over decades. A number of journalists recorded her outburst, and it would be widely reported within an hour, ruining any remaining sympathy people might have had for her. Victoria stood next to me, professional and satisfied, and I'm thankful that the jury saw through her falsehoods and held her accountable. I hope that this verdict offers some peace to all of her victims and their families. The jury made the right choice, and Eleanor Wells will spend the rest of her life in jail, where she belongs. This was one of the most thorough prosecutions I've ever been a part of. A harsh woman named Barbara, who had presided over the trial with firm efficiency, listened to victim impact testimonies for 3 hours during the sentence session 2 weeks later, which was nearly unimpressive. I gave my own statement, detailing the fear of being pushed into the ocean and the betrayal of learning my husband's true intentions, while families of those Eleanor had defrauded spoke about losing their life savings, and Catherine's former coworkers spoke about the promising young teacher whose life was cut short. I have spent my entire life establishing something worthwhile, making a legacy, and supporting my family. Eleanor stood and addressed the courtroom when the judge finally asked her if she had anything to say before sentencing. Throughout the entire ordeal, Eleanor stayed mute, her face a mask of controlled wrath. History will remember me differently than this court does today, but I will not apologize for being a strong woman in a world that punishes strength. I did everything I could to defend my kid and secure our future. The judge's expression remained unchanged. Eleanor Wells, you have been found guilty of 23 separate offenses, including 2 charges of first-degree murder. It was a breathtaking exhibition of narcissism and insanity. Even her own attorneys appeared uneasy. Judge Barbara said, "You are a danger to society and will remain so for the rest of your life. You have shown no remorse, no understanding of the pain you've caused, and no recognition that your actions were wrong. I'm giving you 2 consecutive life sentences without the chance of release based only on the murder charges." Concurrent sentences will be imposed on the fraud and embezzlement accusations. That's more mercy than you gave your victims. You will die in prison. Eleanor staggered to her feet, looking, for the first time since her detention, like her age, weak and dejected, and the guards carried her away in handcuffs without a backward glance. A month later, Bradley was sentenced. He was given 15 years with the chance of parole after serving 10 years, as per the terms of the plea deal. The court stressed that he had committed serious crimes, including attempted murder, but also praised his cooperation with the prosecution and sincere regret. The civil suits followed, and I sued Bradley and Eleanor for the $15 million they had stolen, plus damages for emotional distress, attempted murder, and fraud. Eleanor's assets were seized, including the house, the cars, the art collection, and everything else. He was led away to start his sentence, and I felt nothing watching him go. He had made his decisions, and now he would have to live with the consequences. Bradley had nothing to seize. All his assets had come from Eleanor or from stealing from me. The money was disbursed through a victim compensation program, guaranteeing that everyone she had defrauded received at least partial restitution, but it was something, even though it barely covered what she'd stolen from all her victims. The media attention eventually subsided after 6 months. My company's stock had recovered and then some, and investors saw me as a survivor, someone who couldn't be broken. However, the judgment would follow him after his release, making it nearly impossible for him to rebuild any kind of life. That seemed appropriate. A year after the trial, I stood on the deck of a new yacht. Diana joked that I was now unkillable. In business discussions, and she wasn't totally wrong, no one wanted to cross the lady who'd survived murder and ruined her murderers so completely. Patricia, Diana, and Gregory were with me as we celebrated the closing of a significant business deal, my company's acquisition of a rival that would make us the biggest biotech company on the East Coast. This one was bought with my own money, registered in my name alone, and outfitted with the best security systems money could buy. We drank, and I felt something warm in my chest that had been missing for too long. Peace? Not complete. Diana replied, lifting her glass of champagne to Lindsay, who never lets anything or anyone hold her down. Even though it's getting better. I still occasionally have nightmares about the water and Bradley's hands on my back. How does it feel? Knowing that they are both locked away, Patricia asked softly. I thought about it and said, satisfying. In prison, Eleanor will perish. She will never do harm to anyone. For the following 10 years, Bradley will reflect on his actions and losses. Justice is that. I stopped. However, it doesn't make the past disappear. The fact that I married someone who attempted to kill me is something I still have to deal with. That I didn't anticipate it. You were unable to know. Gregory spoke aggressively. They worked as professional scammers. For decades, Eleanor had been doing this. You were their most dangerous victim, not their first. It was accurate. Eleanor had targeted 6 other persons over the years, according to the FBI's investigation. Rich people she had plundered, manipulated, and befriended. They were reinvestigating the suspicious circumstances of the deaths of 2 of them. I had been fortunate. She had been revealed by my survival before she could take any more lives. It buzzed on my phone. A call from an unidentified number. I nearly erased it, but I opened it out of curiosity. I apologize for all of this. I needed you to know that I did love you, at least initially, even though I know you would never forgive me and I don't deserve it. Before everything was distorted by my mother. I hope you're happy. After giving the message a lengthy look, I erased it without replying. Bradley could look for forgiveness for the rest of his life. I refused to give it to him. There were betrayals that were too profound to overlook. Looking at my face, Diana said, "Everything okay?" Just deleting the past, I answered as I placed my phone away before continuing. Describe the new study you described to me. She began by enthusiastically outlining a new cancer cure that our team was working on. I listened with genuine interest, focusing on the future rather than the past. This was important. I refused to let anyone take away the firm I had established with my own hands, the job we were doing, and the lives we were saving. Orange and pink hues painted the sky as the sun sank over the sea. As I observed the waves, I didn't experience any of the anticipated fear. I had nearly died in the sea. However, I would also not allow that memory to rob me of this. Everything Bradley and Eleanor had attempted to take was mine again. My companionship, my wealth, my tranquility, even the pleasure of being on the lake. What's the best part, you ask? I interrupted Diana's technical explanation with an unexpected statement. They believed they could shatter me. Eleanor believed that since she had gotten away with everything else, she could control me, steal from me, and murder me and still get away with it. Bradley believed there would be no repercussions for betraying me. Both of them totally underestimated me. Patricia said with delight it was their fatal mistake. Gregory added, literally, and we all chuckled. We chatted, drank, and celebrated not only the business deal but also all that we had endured and conquered while we were on the yacht till midnight. For the first time in more than a year, I felt truly satisfied when I returned home to the house that Bradley and Eleanor had attempted to take. 6 years later, Eleanor Wells passed away after a stroke while incarcerated. She was 74. According to the jail warden, she had been a challenging inmate who insisted she didn't belong there and frequently demanded special care. She was not mourned. The jail priest and one court-appointed representative attended her funeral. She was laid to rest in the prison cemetery in an unmarked burial. Her name and legacy were reduced to a warning against narcissism and avarice. Bradley completed his entire 15-year term. 3 times, his appeal for early parole was turned down. He agreed to seek witness protection with a new identity after being released. I was relieved that I didn't hear from him ever again. For someone who had spent his entire existence in the shadow of his mother, he vanished into obscurity, which felt like the right conclusion. In my case, I turned my life around and made it stronger than it had been. By creating life-saving therapies and expanding the frontiers of medical research, my company continued to grow. I never got married again. It was enough once. However, I found satisfaction in my career, my connections, and the knowledge that I had triumphed over the worst kind of treachery. I still remember those times in the ocean, treading water and watching the yacht sail away, often in the middle of the night. But I feel pride instead of fear. I made it through. I retaliated and prevailed. That's the only real kind of retaliation.